There is a reason why I've called this the Czech Dyatlov Pass. In this mysterious incident, not only do 3 very intelligent and experienced hikers go missing, but what the police discovered would be filled with controversy, anger, and even more questions. And then it would happen all over again. So the events that unfolded in the Czech Switzerland have now become one of those ultimate mysteries. People still try to piece them together, and I can promise you that even after today, you too will be asking questions. So, let's dive in. On June 26, 1987, a young couple from Prague boarded a train to Děčín. They were a 22-year-old Lenka and her boyfriend, 23-year-old Pavel. They were first headed to Pavel's family hut, where the couple had agreed to meet a friend of theirs, a 26-year-old Petr, and that was because they all had actually planned to go away for several days. Now, this was going to be a Trump-style camping in the very beautiful part of the Czech Republic called Czech Switzerland, which is located near Hřensko in the north of the country, very near to the Czech-German border. Now, this place has these gorgeous and very unique-looking sandstones, and because of this, in the year 2000, it was made into a national park. You might also have heard of its most famous spot called Pravdivská brána, which is this natural rock formation that looks like a narrow bridge. And at almost 27 meters in length, it is no wonder that thousands of people go into the area just to see that wonder every single year. The trio had packed light, and that is for one important reason. You see, the so-called Trump-style camping, which became popular in the country at the beginning of the 20th century, is not really huge on bringing lots of stuff with you. Instead, Trumps are more about the togetherness and feeling of being surrounded by friends and loved ones. So these hikers would usually pack only the absolute essentials and sort of make do with whatever little they had. And if needed be, they would borrow some gear from someone else or use whatever they could find in the environment. But equally, Trumps are not really known to go on dangerous or treacherous hikes, and so they really have no need to be bringing lots and lots of gear with them anyway. And like I've already said, this movement, which by the way is now deeply rooted in the Czech heritage and is still very much a thing these days, focuses more on being out in the open with friends, telling stories around the campfire, singing with the guitar, and so our trio also packed very light. But there was also this one extra thing they did decide to bring along with them, and that was these 2 film cameras. They thought that by, bringing these cameras along, it would be quite a fun thing to do to document their trip away, and also when they came home, at least they would have something tangible to keep. But that day, instead of heading straight to the rocks, they decided to go and check out the immediate area first. So they left their bags at the luggage office in the meantime, and when they returned for them hours later, they asked for directions to Hřensko, just to make sure that they wouldn't take the wrong turn. And one of the staff at the train station was happy to help and gave them very specific directions on how to reach the rocks. But this man also warned them what route definitely not to take, because that would just lose them hours of time and they could potentially miss the rocks altogether. And after this, they said thank you and off they went. On June 29, at around 4 p.m, the 3 were at Pravdivská brána, deciding on what to do next. They really wanted to get much closer to it and check it out, but they didn't want to pay the admission fee. And so Pavel thought of an idea. They could sneak past the guard with another group of tourists that were just approaching the site right now. But then in the last moment, just as they were coming to the point of entry, the guard looked directly at them, and so the 3 panicked and just ran past him. Now the guard, whose name was actually Josef Dvořák, didn't chase them or anything like that, but he did make a mental note of reporting this incident to the border guards, just in case these 3 actually wanted to cross the border to Germany. Now these days this really would not be a big deal. The borders are open. But you've got to remember that this was in 1987, so it was 2 full years before the Communist Party was overthrown in the country. And so at that time, everyone was still being prevented from crossing the borders, especially to the west. By these 3 people darting past the guard like that, it was entirely possible that they weren't there to just sneak past the admission point, but actually that they wanted to cross to Germany, which was absolutely illegal thing to do. But that wasn't all. It would also turn out that what the guards saw that day became of huge importance, and not just for one, but for 2 reasons. Now, before I go into the very strange story of what was actually found, there's this one thing you really need to know about these 3 people. And that is because it will really help you understand this whole story and why it is such a big deal, and also why many can't let it go. These three were considered experienced trampers, but also these people were very intelligent. Lenka, who was this extremely bright tech chemistry student, was really well known for having this excellent memory. She was amazing at remembering and then recalling all sorts of details that the others would just dismiss, and because of this, she was regarded as one of the best in her year, if not at the entire school. Her boyfriend Pavel, who was just after finishing his engineering degree and was soon to be starting his first job in September, was really the one who was behind all of these trips the most. Everyone knew him to be this truly romantic soul, and so it was really him who loved the idea of gazing at the stars at night, playing the guitar for his girl, and then falling asleep together curled up by the fire. And then you had Petr, a very charming and popular film lab technician at Barrandov Studios, which was this very famous filming studio in Prague, which major film productions from all over the world have and continue on using when they film in the Czech Republic. And it was really Petr's idea to bring those two cameras and document this trip away. Not only so that they would have the images to keep, but also he wanted to practice his craft and his techniques. So knowing all of this, you would have thought that these three were set out for success. On paper, there was just no reason to worry about them at all, because they just had all of these traits and knowledge and experience that would make this sort of a trip really a breeze. But what would actually unfold and what the authorities would find still baffles people to this day. It would turn out that when the three tramps crossed the admission line at Pražská brána, that would be the last time they were ever seen. So the guard, Dvořák, was allegedly the last person who saw them alive and well. Now, when the hikers did not return home as promised, their families first called hospitals and even contacted the border control police. But when they were getting nowhere, they decided that enough was enough and it was time to report them missing. And in August of 1987, the Federal Criminal Bureau launched a nationwide search. They did not just search the park, but they searched all known places where tramps would usually camp. Images of the missing people were shown on the news, and they were printed in the papers. Many interviews were conducted, especially of fellow hikers and trampers, because the theory was that someone could have joined them on the way, and that someone might have heard them. But no new information was coming up. Naturally, rumors started to swirl, and people were wondering if they had maybe wandered off the trail into restricted border zones. This was of course illegal, so was maybe someone watching them? And more importantly, did the border guards at Pražská brána play a role in their disappearance? Now, 2 rounds of searches were conducted, one in August and then second one in September, and that is when the 3 hikers would make news yet again. Now, by the way, if you still haven't, now would be a really good time to join the community. It's free and it's just 1 click away. In September on the 26th, 1987, a group of 5, so 2 women and 3 men, were out and about mushroom picking in the area of Mezní Louka. This is a neighborhood in Hřensko, and the group would come here actually often. But that day, they would find more than just a bunch of freshly grown shrooms. As the leader of the group, whose name was Zdeněk, was going around the U-shaped valley, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. There were a couple of round white things laying several meters ahead of him, buried in the leaves. Not recognizing what it was, Zdeněk approached it, and when he got much closer to it, a jolt of shock went through his body. He mentally made a note of where the spot was and ran back into the village, where he called the police immediately. When the investigators got to the spot where Zdeněk was describing, they immediately knew that they had the right place. Nestled among a pile of dead leaves were 2 human skulls. But this was far from being the only discovery made that day. When the police scoped the area, they would make the worst findings yet. About 80 meters away on a rocky ledge lay 2 incomplete human skeletons. They were covered with this large branch from a pine tree, with one of them tied in a hog tie, wrists to ankles, with a rope knotted in a French climbing knot. Then, a little bit further from those 2, was a 3rd human skeleton. And this one was buried in this shallow grave beneath some sand and branches in this rocky crevice. All bodies were very badly decomposed. And, because there was practically no soft tissue left, it was impossible to say what the cause of death was. But one thing struck the investigators as highly interesting. It would turn out that none of the bones had been broken, which is something you would expect if they had fallen, or maybe if a jolt of lightning had struck them. The only trauma that was found was one of the skulls, and it had a small hole above its left eye socket, which was presumably done by a blunt object. But according to the pathologist, this was not necessarily what had killed the person, and apparently this didn't even have to cause a serious injury to the brain, so they weren't treating as a serious clue. But either way, everybody started asking one very pressing question: what had really happened? Now, before they could go any further, they really wanted to see if they could at least identify the bodies. There was very little to go on, but as one of the officers was still searching the area, he made another very important discovery. Scattered around were some personal items of what must have belonged to the 3 deceased people. There were even a few backpacks, and inside, apart from some clothes and one camera, was one ID. And this belonged to the missing hiker, Pavel. Now, the police were of course aware of the missing trio, and so they wondered if the other 2 bodies could have belonged to Lenka and Pavel. And unfortunately, that would be confirmed. Lenka's remains were the ones found in a shallow grave, whereas the 2 men were tied up and buried together on that rocky ledge. Now, even though that there was very little left of them, the police did know that at the time of the death and when the decomposition was taking place, the whole place must have smelled really badly. So why did nobody notice this? It's not like this area was completely rural. Granted, the area was not on the main trail, but it was not entirely in the middle of nowhere either. So why were the remains only discovered now? Could it be that the hikers were actually killed somewhere else, and then the bodies were just dumped there? And also, the way the bodies were arranged also sparked a lot of questions. It felt very rushed, almost as if the killer got disturbed. And also, why was one of the bodies tied up like that? None of what they found made any sense. And then there was the matter of the missing camera. What had happened to it? What is also important to say is the fact that the other camera that still contained the film, well, when the family asked for it back, they only received the developed images and not the negative itself. But why? What was on it that the police did not want to release? Could it have captured the killer? Or was it maybe used by the killer to take pictures of the victims in the last moments? Speaking of the families, they didn't get notified of the bodies until the 8th of October. But it was really what happened next that shook everyone. When word got out that Lenka, Pavel and Petr had been found deceased, everyone wanted to get to the bottom of what really happened to them. But this is exactly where things got a really dark turn. At first, the police claimed that the 3 must have eaten the wrong type of mushroom. But from the very little they had left, the toxicologist actually showed up with a report and said that no way that could have been true. And so they had to come up with something else. The police then started claiming that the 3 must have had this serious falling out, which led them to kill one another. But again, that made no sense because remember, their body showed no signs of trauma apart from that one skull, or they had no broken bones. So how would they kill one another? They didn't poison themselves, we already know that from the toxicology report. And even though not all poisons do show up, but what is the chance of them having one of those highly rare substances on them? And why? As far as everyone was concerned, they all got on really great. They were really good friends, and of course Lenka and Pavel were even going out. Now, even with all of this theory actually has never been disproven, even though nobody really believes it. Then there was the missing camera, which we could say a few things about. A, the 3 just lost it themselves. B, if they did for some reason decided to kill one another, the killer could have disposed of it. C, their actual killer or killers could have kept it because of whatever was captured on it in their last moments. Or D, and bear with me for a second, what if the police did find the second camera and they decided to lie about it and hide their evidence? This is something that nobody really is talking about, and it is possible that the 3 did take a picture of their killer. But that could have been someone of power, maybe even someone like the guard at Pravčeská brána, Josef Dvořák, or it could have been even someone from the War Control, whom, by the way, were never formally interviewed. Now, there's one more fact about why Josef Dvořák's testimony about seeing the trio for the last time is important. I've actually already covered this case, but there was another similar incident a year later in 1988. There, 2 young women, who were also out there for a few days on a tram-style hiking trip, were spotted by Dvořák himself. And guess what? That was also the last time the 2 women were ever seen live. The only difference is that these two have never been found, and so we can't really compare much more. But it does sound pretty strange that both times missing people were seen last by the same person. And because of this, many people believe that Dvořák and or the Boer guards had something to do with both disappearances. And this is including Pavel's own mother Eva, who remained convinced that one of the Boer guards killed her son. But as it would turn out, the official ruling turned out to be much more obscure than that. And quite frankly, very insulting and disrespectful. After looking at all the evidence and interviews, the investigators finally came to a conclusion. But honestly, if they just came out to say that they had no idea what actually happened, it would have been a better outcome. Because of what they said will make you really mad. Not only did they rule out foul play, oh no, they had the balls to claim that the trio were struck with lightning. I mean, how crazy and totally unbelievable is that? But you know what, let's look at it for a second, shall we? So, from several weather reports from that time and area, we know that there in fact was no lightning happening around that time. This is actually further supported by Eva herself, who was really digging into this, and I mean, I can't really blame her. Her son was killed and the police refused to investigate it further, claiming it onto something so ridiculous it just makes you laugh. She requested these very detailed reports from the people that track weather, and they too showed that during July, August and September, the weather was pretty clear. Now, we of course have no idea of the date of death, but we have plenty of other information that just proves lightning was not the killer. From when I checked last, natural causes cannot tie you up. Also, there was no trauma found on any of the bodies that would confirm that, yes, they were struck by lightning. And I'm not sure if the officials actually did do their homework on this, but when people get struck by lightning, the injuries are pretty severe, especially if it does end up killing you. Also, what are the chances that you would get buried in a shallow grave after something like that happens to you? One thing that had been found was the ripped shoe that belonged to Petr. And so what happened there? You still have the missing camera, the negatives from the second camera that have never been released, the fact that no officials were ever interviewed about this case, and let's also not forget that the bodies were found in different places. But let me get this straight. Officially, they all got struck at the same time, at two different places, and then the first got buried in a shallow grave, while her friend got tied up, and then the two men got covered with this one branch, which by the way was from a pine tree located 10 meters away, while their heads were removed and later their skulls found 80 meters away. Yeah, I also find this ridiculous and insulting. Several years later, and with the Communist Party now gone, in 1992, the three grieving families put this intense pressure on the newly formed Post-Communism Office for Documentation and Investigation of Crimes of Communism. And they were successful, so the case got reopened. Everyone really hoped that this time the investigation would be free of abuse of power, hiding others' mistakes or actions, and that it could finally be impartial. That was, after all, in the heart of this newly formed body, because as it would turn out, and to nobody's surprise, the old regime was full of lying, cheating, cover-ups. Basically, the whole system was rotted to the core. And so no wonder that families were really hopeful that this time they could finally get some answers, and that they would no longer be fobbed up with such a laughable explanation. And soon enough, the new investigators confirmed that the deceased hikers were not indeed killed by the lightning. They also made all sorts of tests in the area of where the bodies had been found, and they did rule out one thing. Those two skulls could not have gotten detached and rolled into their final place by themselves. This means that someone must have put them there. You could say that maybe some animal would have detached them and brought them into their final place, but that sounds very unlikely, because why would they do that just to the skulls? Why would they not rummage through the other bones as well? So did the killer come back? Or were they indeed destroyed by someone else and they had to abandon the site, leaving the body so poorly hidden? Then some other new evidence emerged. Apparently, the backpacks were found hidden underneath some bushes. But if someone was trying to conceal them, why not just take them away and destroy them off-site? In addition to this, Pavel's glasses were also found neatly wrapped in a piece of paper, 80 meters away from his body. But this was 3 years after the initial search had been completed. So were they just missed? Or did someone return and place them there to be found? Now, after gathering indirect evidence and concluding more interviews, the investigators did actually come up with 3 suspects. And these were members of the Border Control who used to patrol the area frequently. And the day after the trio was last seen, one of those guards changed his patrol route, which coincidentally was through the area that would later be discovered as the crime scene. And so it all really looked promising, but before anything became concrete, the investigation stalled again. The case was handed down to another unit, and apparently so that the case would be free of any political influence, but that is exactly where things would go south again. The biggest issue was that by the time the case was reopened, many documents had either disappeared or were simply withheld. And so very frustratingly, because of this, the new unit decided to not follow up on any of the new evidence that was just unearthed, and in 2002, the case got closed for good. With the lightning strike being ruled out and the very likelihood of the border guards being involved, another theory points out the direct link to KGB. There was this unit that was allegedly directly linked to the Soviet intelligence agency, and under the codename of Diamond, they used to train in and around the area of Rensko in the 80s. Even at the scene, the unit's card had been spotted, which coincidentally had also been linked to a series of explosions in front of the Communist Party buildings. So it is entirely possible that the hikers saw or took images of something they should not have. And as a result of this, they got eliminated. And this is especially suspicious given the rapid closure of the case, disappearance of evidence, and the lack of interest post-1989 revolutions. Now, looking at the case from a different angle, some propose that Lenka might have been the first victim. She could have been taken away, possibly even assaulted, and then when the men discovered what had happened, they tried intervening but got killed in the process. Lenka's body was buried and the others tied because they were resisting. Now you have the torn clothes, cut shoes, and missing camera, and they all support this narrative. And so what they might have witnessed and photographed as evidence could have cost them their life. And whoever killed them took the camera and obliterated the film. The last thing worth mentioning is that the region has proven mysterious for decades. Urban legends tell of headless bodies of border police from the 1930s. Multiple disappearances in that area over the years suggest that maybe this was not an isolated event. Could it have been the work of a serial predator who waited for the victims in the woods? Or was there someone protecting hidden Nazi-era treasure tunnels, something the trio might have stumbled upon, only to be eliminated to preserve the secrets? And in fact, Lenka did carry this map where she marked all sorts of places, so the question is, was she tracking something in particular? Or did they accidentally approach something forbidden? Unfortunately, despite multiple theories and even found suspects, no one has ever been charged for the murder of these 3 hikers. There are still many questions that remain unanswered, and one of the most burning ones is definitely whether the killer or killers are still out there. And what really gets me is the fact that the regime at the time was allowed to sweep under the rug whatever they wanted. They were basically free to do whatever, and ordinary people, especially if they got in their way, got cast aside and punished. And so this case isn't just about bones in the forest. It's about youthful promise extinguished, about justice betrayed by the system, and about questions without answers, including who they really were, what they saw, what they shot on the film, and why no one wants those photos and truths to come out. And as you can see, it does resemble the infamous Dyatlov Pass incident in many ways, because it does look like these 2 cases were nothing but a huge political cover-up. But do let me know your thoughts on this one. And if you haven't, then go check out my Dyatlov Pass episode so you can see those creepy similarities for yourself. Until next time.